hello everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and speak to you, so I do appreciate it. We're going to get underway here and talk about marketing in the age of AI. And so I'm going to start right off, and I don't mean this to be pedantic anyway, but I'm starting with a basic definition. I'm a business leader here at Google, and as we invest more and more time and energy from an AI perspective, and I'll talk about that, I find myself spending, again, more and more time of understanding how it works and what it's good for. And again, I'm going to talk a lot about this, but I think it is important for all of us to start to spend time and energy on this because we really do believe it has a significant impact or potential impact in a lot of different places. And again, that's what I want to talk about. And as you can see in the definition, implicit in it is that the ability to do many of the rote tasks that we are typically doing, and this cuts across sector and industry, and it is, again, something that we need to be eyes wide open on. At Google, the way I typically characterize our investment in AI, and this is a trope that you've probably heard from us before, that we have been an AI-first company for well over a decade. The way it works inside of Google is that we have a team called the Google Brain team, which might be a little hubris-ish in nature, but it is the team that is doing all the emerging R&D for and from an artificial intelligence perspective. And so they are building many of the new innovations that come out. I might say some words that may require some definition or lookup, but even things like foundational work that allows us to do just much more processing of data in these large language models that I'll talk about in a moment. TensorFlow is a software that we've put out that actually allows many organizations, both inside of Google and outside of, tensor processing units, which is the foundation of, again, the ability to do more advanced maneuvers from a data processing perspective. And again, so much of it is the ability to leverage those for a variety of different use cases. And so on this slide, again, the intent here is there's a couple graphical representations of the industries and sectors where this starts to manifest and show up. And so as an example, two that I would call out here. One would be, in particular, that's native to me in California. We have a wildfire problem, and you can start to leverage AI, and we're working with third-party developers on this front to actually chart and navigate the possible direction of wildfires to help both communities in need and then also the service workers on the ground that are in a position to kind of help fight those fires. So small and subtle, but ways that organizations are using it. Another one is, and again, maybe a little bit more pedestrian, pun not intended, is from a traffic flow perspective. And so working with towns and cities and municipalities to actually be able to dynamically change the flow of traffic based on traffic patterns. And again, it's these simple applications of the technology that, again, make our lives better in some cases, and some where it might be subtle and you really don't even realize it. At Google, and as I was saying, if I kind of characterize this as a hub and spoke model or a horizontal, is that you have this foundational capability that is both outsourced but then also leveraged across the various product areas that we have at Google. And so on this slide is a representation of the 9 billion user products that we have, and very much from a business strategy perspective is weaving into each of these many of these advancements and capabilities to make the consumer products more effective and useful to users. And again, a canonical example that I like to speak to is Google Photos, where it makes it seamless and easy to find loved ones in I don't know if you use Google Photos, but can easily identify people and go back in time from when my kids were born all the way until they're a junior in high school and actually be able to catalog that. And again, it's a subtle thing, but it is a powerful technology that allows us to do more interesting things from a business perspective. And we also do this in ads. And so this is more or less just a quote from one of our recent earnings calls where analysts were asking Philip Schindler, who's our chief business officer, well, you have all this AI. You talk about how you use it and leverage in many of the consumer products that you have. Well, how does it show up from an advertising perspective? And just like all those other consumer products, the AI technologies and capabilities are being deployed and applied to our ads products. And that's where we're going to start to get into the AI and marketing side of this. And you can imagine many of those same capabilities, whether it's, and again, I'll talk about this in a moment, from a search targeting perspective or a search bidding perspective or a search creative perspective, generative AI of being able to create creative assets or doing bidding predictions based on what likelihood of an event is going to happen, using large language models to understand language more and be able to predict what people are going to be searching for. And so all of these are applied to our products in some way, shape, or form. And I wanted to speak to this large language model notion. And if you're not familiar with large language models, again, there's some terms that at least Google uses, BERT and Lambda. If you want to know anything about some of the terms that I'm saying, I encourage you to go to ai.google.com, which will talk both about the innovation, but then also the responsible approach that we're taking on this front. And these large language models have gotten so good and it really kind of evolving to the point where, much better understanding of human language. And again, you can see they've grown 5,000x over the last couple years. And as we think about in service of our mission of organize the world's information and make it universally accessible, this is going to play a big role. And as part of our AI initiatives, we have a 1,000 language effort to be able to basically translate the 1,000 different languages and dialects therein. And again, as you think about access to information for citizens around the globe, we think it has a huge potential for those kinds of things. And I'd be remiss to not talk about ChatGPT, because I'm assuming all of us who's a user of ChatGPT. I use it to see how my junior in high school would possibly cheat on an essay, or I write limericks and rap lyrics to a potential meeting note, and again, or whatever it might be. But I think for the first time, if many of these terms are like, again, what are you talking about? I think it is a great representation of the power of large language models. And as a consumer, you see that power. And again, it is that tech and that capability that is fueling much of both the consumer products that we're working on, but then again on the ad side. And so a little bit of a mantra or a call to arms from Google is to do the tried and new. And that many of our products have been around for a long time from an advertising perspective. If you think about search marketing, we've been at that for a good 2 decades. But the underlying tech is reinventing modern search to an extent. And then the same applies to how we actually think about this from what are new products that we can be building and delivering. And so, especially during these times of macroeconomic uncertainty, and as I engage with customers and agencies alike, everybody is scrambling for efficiency and profitability. And we believe that I'll call it the power pair of modern search, leveraging AI-based solutions, and I'll talk about that in a second, and Performance Max, which again I will talk about, is the best way to get maximum reach and coverage and drive value. If you think about the search side, I'd articulate the 3-legged stool of search. It is targeting, it is bidding, and it is creatives. We generally say that, and this is a public stat that we have shared, 80% or so of our customers use automated bidding, but a much smaller percentage focus on value. And so one of the big focus areas from an automation perspective is to focus on value. And actually, if you know the ROI, whether it's a ROAS or an LTV or a PLTV, to bid to those. And so that's automated bidding. It's responsive search ads, terms that may or may not matter, but imagine generative AI, creating different ad assets based on, again, what we know about the user. And then last but not least is keyword targeting with broad match. And when you leverage the 3 of those in concert, what we typically see is that customers who are relying on more of the what I'd call old search best practices see on average 20% more conversion volume or value in cases. And so the kind of mantra that I typically say is that there's gold in them thar hills. And if I go back to the definition, if we are reliant on picking the keyword, writing the creative, and then ultimately also doing the manual bidding, the machine has gotten that much better, and you are at a competitive disadvantage in that situation. And then on the PMAX side, it is a newer product that we've come out with over the last year or two on the heels of things like universal app campaigns or smart shopping campaigns, which is a full funnel product. And so you identify what your marketing objective is, and then we run across all of those inventory channels that we have at Google, from search, discovery, Gmail, YouTube, and then of course the display network. And all of that is powered by AI, and we're making real-time predictions and decisions that if you're trying to generate a lead or a sale, that we're going to buy that impression and that impression. And that is ultimately what PMAX does. And when we find that when advertisers add PMAX to their existing campaigns, they see an uplift of 19% in conversions. So when you combine both of these, if you're leveraging the older best practices and not leveraging some of these more AI-powered marketing vehicles, you're leaving opportunity on the table. And like I said, during times of plenty, it's an opportunity, but certainly during these macroeconomic times where people are looking for extra value and profitability, it's something we encourage. But we recognize that as you take your hands off the keyboards a little bit, that comes with change, and that's what I want to kind of pivot to next. Agencies at large, when we look at our own internal data, are on average at the same level of adoption relative to customers direct. The one variation in that is actually targeting. So on average, agencies globally are anywhere from 5 to 15 points behind customers in leveraging kind of these modern search best practices. And again, if we think about where we've been for the last 10 years, it has been about picking keywords and doing manual bidding. And again, it is easy to say, sometimes it's hard to do. And as I maybe finish up with the last slide or two, a lot of this is about the change management. As an industry and an ecosystem over the last 10 years or so, we've all pivoted to this next phase from a mobile standpoint. And I think as we lean more into automation, it's going to bring upon another wave of change management that's required in the enterprise. We did some work here with BCG, and they looked at leaders and laggards in the digital space based on the performance of their business. And there are 3 characteristics that typically show up when we're talking about the leaders. Number 1 is, it is the C-suite alignment, and it is that ability for the leaders to create the conditions for the organization to move through change. And again, I think we could talk a long time about this, but both in the mobile phase, which I participated in at Google, and then certainly now we are seeing organizations lead in and setting the conditions, because it is counter to how we've been operating as a business for a long time. The second is scaling capabilities, and we bring Scott up. I think we'll talk a lot about this, of what else is it that you're doing from an enterprise perspective to both build the human capital, build technical capabilities, and much more. And then last but not least, it's the always-on mindset of testing and scaling. And by no means are we saying running into the building, cavalier, but to start to test and scale. And as you start to see green shoots, that you want to evolve what you're doing. And I'd link it back to actually the C-suite. And what I typically see is that organizations are very good at testing, but often you need to then find out, well, where are the bottlenecks within the organization? Is it processes? Is it billing models? Is it solutions? Is it tools? Is it tech that we have? And that's where, again, the C-suite needs to be close to a lot of this so they can start to identify, great, we see green shoots, but how are we getting in our own way as we're trying to deploy these solutions? Again, something that Scott and I will talk about a little bit is that in addition to those characteristics, I think it's the agility of, well, where do you spend the time? And there's no shortage of what I would consider more durable strategies to deploy with your customers, whether it's first-party data, privacy-centric measurement, focusing more on creatives, full funnel activations, experimentation frameworks, and much more. And so there's a lot here that we'll try and unpack with Scott. And I want to finish with that it's not us necessarily just presenting to you and saying, everybody, you need to do this. Everybody, as we've all through from an ecosystem perspective, had to go through change. If you don't know who this guy is, his name's Prabhakar. He runs the knowledge and information team at Google, which includes the search organization, the maps organization, the commerce organization, and the ads organization. And he recently was presenting to his leadership team as we were thinking about what we want to accomplish in 2023. And he was really pushing back to the BCG study to challenge the dominant logic. We need to think differently about how we operate. And again, I'm sharing this mostly from a we are in this together perspective. This cohort, the agency ecosystem, is incredibly important to us at Google. We are certainly, trying to advocate for innovation in this space, and it's all about working with and through you, but it will require some work to get there. So that's it. I'm going to actually ask Scott to come up now, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this. All right.
Hello.
Welcome, Scott. Thank you for being here. We're gonna start out with, I'm assuming everybody knows you at this point, but why don't you say your name, what you do, and you got a new job, so maybe share what you're doing these days.
So my name's Scott Hagedorn. Just recently started a new job after being at my old job for 18 years. My job is with my team, to weave together kind of the unique assets that Publicis has acquired and the group has acquired over the years. So Sapient, Epsilon, Profitero, CitrusAd, and to build them into new solutions that we deploy. And I'm there to really help and see through the group's transformation from mainly a services company into a platform company. Because to your point, we think a platform company is a lot more durable for the future. So that's my job.
Great, awesome, thank you for that. So I want to kind of, I shared a little bit of the riff on how we think about AI and marketing, but can you share as it relates to your current role, what are the priorities that you have going into 2023?
So I think when it comes to AI and kind of ML and AI and automation and where we're going with it, I think where we're seeing kind of the most traction right now is in an area called that we call real-time interaction, or RTI, which is essentially using AI to integrate together multivariate experiences across media and creative and offer. And we're seeing some really fascinating kind of outputs from that. And we use all kinds of stuff. Like we use RTI, we use Google's Oculi capability with computer vision, and we're kind of starting to stack all that stuff together. And as maybe some of my friends in the audience know, I'm a complete multivariate test design nerd. Like, I don't know why we don't spend more time doing it as an industry, and I think it's just because it's been complicated to work in all these different SaaS platforms and to have the discipline to put the media and creative and content together from a sequencing perspective. But that's where AI is super powerful in terms of being able to run these types of things now from a cloud perspective and not necessarily having to design these complicated AB or ABC type tests. And it's super fascinating to work in the space when you're now kind of testing at an identity graph level and starting to build really cool, unique tests that are referencing a lot of different attributes from an audience data perspective, which is why we were so keen on the Epsilon acquisition. We've really deepened our capability and our persistency of audience data.
Awesome, that's great. I'm going to bridge a little bit from, I talked about the organizational role, kind of the executive top-down, kind of creating the conditions. Do you feel, as you kind of just outlined and explained what you are focused on that front, easy to do, hard to do, as you think about moving the organization along? Is it everybody is rowing in the same direction? Like, what's your sense on that?
It's harder to do than, it's always harder to do. Change management is tough. And I kind of, when I think about this space specifically, I try to go back to when I was a digital activation lead. And as much as I wanted to focus in on the higher order strategy, the reality is that a lot of my day was manually moving data between different systems. And it was boring and it was rote and I hated it. And, trying to change that behavior, trying to change your model, trying to kind of unpack that and potentially replace some rote tasks with something that's more automated is tough business. It's also tough to sell to clients when you're changing kind of their team model and your compensation structure at the same time,
And so, and again, I'm going to maybe pick on that one a little bit. And is that a slow, gradual, again, maybe even back to the change management of test and scale, you work your way through that, or is it big change at once, or is it, again, you're kind of like boiling the frog over time? How do you think about that?
It's definitely, I think with Publicis Group, it's big changes all at once. And for instance, we made pretty quickly the acquisitions of CitrusAd and Profitero, and we've very quickly built a multi-party clean room capability with Epsilon to bring retailers and brands together. And we're currently spinning up a new suite of planning utilities that can help allocate into this new space. And so all that stuff has happened like in the last 6 months or so. And it's happening very, very quickly. We're running now within Epsilon, we're running Walgreens loyalty program as well as their RMN capability for all brands. And then interestingly, if you look across how we're activating in that space in real time, it's all holding companies are buying through our platform.
And then since you're starting to bring up some brands and sharing some examples, can you maybe speak a little bit more to a brand or two that has been, leveraging some either automation capabilities that you're referencing or others, how it's performed, or what worked, what didn't, and why, if you have any kind of advice on that front?
Yeah, one of the cool ones is for a big apparel company. We used Oculi, so we used a Google platform to use computer vision and scan across like 2,500 different assets. And we started to see very quickly using the AI the patterns of what makes a successful asset, which then kind of round-tripped its way back to the content creators within the production teams and the creative agencies. And so that space is like fascinating to me. It's like a reinvention potentially of brand planning where you're no longer kind of subjectively making up what the strategy should be. You're actually being guided by quantitative data. And I think what sometimes hasn't worked necessarily is what doesn't work sometimes is when you don't have what we would think of as the modern copywriter, art director combo of strategist and data scientists to really understand how to unlock the capability that AI and ML can bring.
Yeah, the strategy, the data scientist, the product, I think there's almost implicit and kind of when I think about the BCG stuff of creating the conditions of the small teams of you're testing and scaling and trying to identify the bottlenecks. There's almost it's kind of an overused term sometimes, the growth team or whatever it is to come together to make those things work in those early phases, I think is incredibly important.
Totally. Yeah, and that's where, to your point, I think sort of setting the strategy from the top down of here's where we're going. and knowing or having enough of a working knowledge to say, like, here's strategically kind of the green space that we can go into is kind of the charge. And I think, we're trying to think through how we recompile assets and ultimately, like, who's going to be interfacing with the AI. Who is the team that's working? What's the user experience look like to even be able to activate the capability?
So that's all great, thank you. The wanted to ask a little bit. Obviously, my presentation talks a little bit about the marketing and media side of things. What's your sense on how it's either being used or deployed, or just broad perspectives on, again, going to reach customers and leveraging automated systems to do that, where historically the hands-on keyboards or the rote work was done? Any thoughts or perspectives on that front?
Sure. Yeah, it's funny. I pitched Eric Schmidt 15 years ago. I was like, what we need to do? We need to collapse down DV360 and SA360 and Google Analytics and all this stuff into just one interface. And he was like, that's $1 billion idea. And I'm still waiting for it to happen. Empathetically, we're working on kind of collapsing that stuff down and making it better. We've seen, sort of amazing, we're doing some amazing stuff with the Google team right now to start to automate our search capabilities. And we would love to be in a place where we have like a PMAX like planning capability that works with Google, but also can API into the rest of the ecosystems, because dynamically allocating money to where the opportunity is, that needs to happen on the fly through AI and ML.
Yep. I think that complexity versus simplicity is always the balance, and especially at Google, we're always trying to solve for those use cases of the most sophisticated customer down to the smallest customer, and that balance therein. And again, a part of that strategy is the collapsing to make it easier for marketers to essentially, at scale, reach users. Maybe that the bridge there is, we talked about whether it's first-party data or creative or privacy-centric measurement. How do you think about if you're kind of agreeing with that direction of travel, and then it is the skills and capabilities in-house? What do you, and again, I think you've already articulated, but some of those skills or capabilities are the investment areas that certainly you guys are going down the path, but you think are useful for everybody else in this room. Like, what are those things that the human starts to do and should be doing as you allow the AI to do its thing to reach users?
I think hopefully elevating strategic thinking. That needs to be the end goal, and how AI is used as a tool to elevate strategic thinking is where we want to go. And that's maybe a bold statement, because it's somewhat scary, especially in periphery or adjacency to a services model for an agency. But technology is a great tool, always has been a great tool for marketing. Maybe too great of a tool. I think we'll end up probably pretty soon wondering what are the boundaries of ethical persuasion, especially when you're able to look at 7,000, 8,000 different attributes per individual, and able to market on a one-to-one basis or a personalized basis, and essentially pick people off with messaging that can lead them into some dark places. Like, sooner or later, we're going to have a reckoning as an industry about how we use data and how far we're willing to take it. That's a crappy answer, I think. I didn't mean to be a downer.
What about, again, on the human side, the skill sets and capabilities as you look to kind of expand the organization, whether it's hiring outside? What are the types of things that you're looking for? Or are you looking to retrain as you kind of pivot and kind of evolve the organization? Like, what do you think about from, again, the skill sets that you're looking for, and whether it's hire or train?
Yeah, I think it's definitely trainable. In one of my previous incarnations, I'm like Gandalf of advertising now. I'm like Scott though Gray from 2 seasons ago. I made a mistake, and we cut our investment team in half, and I was like, okay, we're going to have the biddable people and the non-biddable people, and the non-biddable people are going to do things the old way of doing it, and then the biddable people are going to be focused on the future. And that was the completely wrong strategy. What ended up happening was that we retrained the linear teams to take more go-long positions in digital, and so they were able to bring their skill set of negotiating the upfront into pivoting a strategy to think more about guaranteed private marketplaces and taking more longer positions on inventory, but then we would use the biddable team to decision that inventory later. And so I think like you can totally adapt people for the future if you can show them how to use the tool and what the tool is meant to do, and that it's actually potentially there to elevate them and not replace them.
Maybe along those lines, but within the organization, both maybe it's an organizational construct. And again, this is more from a media perspective, but a lot of times, we have media buying in silos. And again, I think part of the frame, obviously, that the consumer is, going across surfaces and, types of media. How do you think about the organizational construct of from a media buying perspective across the different silos and breaking those down?
Yeah. It's still, I think there's still work to do to switch some people on to the implications of a data-driven behavioral approach probably to media. So, I'm a personal believer that CRM and media collided like 10 years ago, and we aren't talking about it enough. And so what we are aiming for is kind of, that's how we're trying to bring the folks together, is trying to educate the media teams on what you can do with audience data, and also trying to then, on the flip side, educate the CRM teams on how to stitch up CRM data into private marketplaces or deal IDs to activate the media later with programmatic technology. And that's weaving those two things together is kind of like it's like a big mission of mine.
Awesome. And then maybe the last question I will ask is just, as you have any kind of words of wisdom for folks that may be going down the journey, not as far as you have thus far, but what would be your advice to people as they, look to evolve their capabilities on this front?
Yeah, I think finding that kind of combination, that dream team of a strategist and a data scientist that can work together and spin up these opportunities is really important. The role of the marketing technologist on a team and defining that for the agencies on kind of what are their swim lanes, how do they work, how do they enable. And then identifying potentially like a finite 2 or 3 different use cases on how you want to apply it. Personally, though, like I said, where we're making kind of the most impact is on that multivariate kind of machine space, because you're optimizing so many different dimensions at the same time. It's audience, media, content, offer, all happening concurrently. That's a special space. But as I said before, we've got to figure out like what's our self-regulation of how far we'll take that based on the amount of audience data that we can capitalize on.
Awesome. Well, I think we're at about time. I want to, thank you, Scott, for, as a leader in this space, sharing your kind of thoughts and pearls of wisdom. I'd appreciate everybody spending the time with us to talk about marketing in the age of AI.
Totally, and thank you for putting 2 hydrodynamic gentlemen together on a panel.
Handsome hydrodynamic panel.
Exactly.
That's right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.